Because Congress is so late establishing appropriations for fiscal 2024, this year is getting lapped by the 2025 fiscal year. The administration releases its budget proposal, more of a wish list really, today. It'll get ceremonial attention anyhow, but there's still some deadlines for this year. We get more now from WTOP Capitol Hill correspondent Mitchell Miller. And yeah, they're kind of backing up into one big budgetary blob, you might say.
Yeah, and the blob keeps moving very, very slowly. It's a bad horror movie. This is really a strange situation where you have this overlap taking place. And the president, of course, unveiling this wish list in a political year, an election year. Of course, this wish list is going to be even longer and bigger than usual. And that means, of course, that a lot of this won't actually come to fruition, but at least it will be the traditional starting point for looking at all these spending plans. Now, the Republicans tried to get ahead of the president last week. The House Budget Committee voted along party lines last week to approve a 2025 budget framework. Again, take all of this with a grain of salt, but the GOP spending outline would basically have the defense budget go over the $1 trillion mark through 2032, and there would be, at least according to Republicans, a savings of nearly $3 trillion over 10 years. But of course, they are very short on specifics. A lot of this is based, as is often the case, on economic growth. So the GOP plan would essentially try to balance things out over the next decade. It would still add, though, $6 trillion to the deficit. Republicans in the last year never really brought a budget resolution. So this is a non-binding budget outline. But again, it's a starting point as we see this tug of war begin in 2025 as we try to get done with 2024's fiscal year.
Yeah, and just briefly on 2025, is it likely that there will be this parity, I mean parity, not parody like a comedy,
right,
of parity of the non-defense side and the defense sides?
I think they're going to try to get to that, but I don't know that they're actually going to reach that. There are obviously a lot of people, particularly defense hawks, who want to see the defense side really continue to amp up, given all the things that are happening internationally, both in the Middle East and Ukraine, elsewhere. But Democrats will, of course, be pushing hard to get more domestic spending to try to get to some of that parity. And as you mentioned, some people think that this is a parody, parody, because of the unrealistic level of some of these proposals.
And let's talk about the set of appropriations bills required to get 2024 done, because again, there was, when we last spoke, 2 deadlines. They avoided that, but there's still 2 new deadlines.
Right. So the Senate finally agreed to the first part of the deadline, which was on Friday, and this is this first tranche of 6 appropriations bills, a little less controversial than the ones that are coming up, which include the Defense Department budget. And what's interesting about this is some critics have pointed out that while there was this attempt to get to regular order by Republicans as well as Democrats, essentially some people would argue that the omnibus that traditionally has been passed near the end of the year were effectively in that same mode, only we're more than 5 months late. It's just that they've been broken up into these 2 minibuses. So over the next 2 weeks, we're going to be seeing a lot of progress on the second part, the 6 appropriations bills, and that also includes Homeland Security, some other controversial areas. But they do believe, lawmakers from both parties, that this will finally sew up the 2024 fiscal year. We'll see if that happens, but that means even if they do it as they plan to do it, that the fiscal budget for this year won't be completed until March 22nd, coming a couple of weeks after, of course, the State of the Union address, which was last week, and of course, again, almost 6 months beyond the fiscal start of the year back in October.
We're speaking with Mitchell Miller. He is Capitol Hill correspondent for WTOP. And just out of curiosity, what is the status budget-wise of something that's relatively minor in the grand scheme of things, but seems to crystallize the way the paralysis happens in Washington, and that's the FBI headquarters lift and shift gambit.
Right. It's so interesting because, as you mentioned, the FBI budget really isn't that large when you compare it to everything else, but it has become an unlikely political football over the last couple of years. Republicans continuing to say that the FBI has been weaponized in connection with various investigations and how its resources have been put together. And so in this latest group of appropriations bills, Republicans, House Speaker Mike Johnson, trying to at least get some kind of victory for Republicans, cited the fact that the FBI funding had actually been reduced by close to 7%. However, what did not get a lot of attention is the fact that part of the cut to the FBI was basically just due to the fact that Senator Richard Shelby of Alabama has retired, and he had included more than $600 million for an FBI facility in Alabama when there was all this discussion about where the FBI headquarters was going to be moved from D.C. Was it going to go to Virginia? Was it going to go to Maryland? Currently, it is planned to go to Maryland, but right now that money has been taken out because the senator is simply not there anymore. So it's kind of a ghost savings, if you will.
Right. Yes, I guess they would have been moving parts of the FBI to Huntsville, which
Right.
is an amazingly large and diverse federal center. You know, there's everything from NASA to the missile command for the Army. So it would have been a good place for them, I guess. But
exactly. Well, that was the thought of Senator Shelby, and obviously, as the former head of the Appropriations Committee, he wielded a lot of power, and he was ready to jump in if Maryland and Virginia couldn't get this decision done, and so that's where that $600 million plus came from.
Right. In fact, you can't even get out of the Huntsville airport before seeing a frosted door with Richard Shelby's name on it, even at an office
right.
there. So I don't know what that'll become. Maybe another TSA facility. Anything else we need to know about the week ahead on the Hill? I mean, what will they do now?
Well, there's still the matter of funding for Ukraine and Israel, and there just doesn't seem to be any way that House Speaker Mike Johnson has figured out the way to put together this puzzle. He supports money for Ukraine. There seems to be bipartisan support for Ukraine, but we go back to that issue that has bedeviled both parties for a long time, and that is the issue of immigration and the southern border. And because there is no apparent ability to reach an agreement, or when an agreement was reached on the border deal, then it was scotched in part by the Republicans and former President Trump. We don't really have any sense of where it's going, where everybody is really saying that this is a burning fire right now out in the international world, and yet Congress just simply doesn't know how to address it to get it through. Now, there is one way that it might get through, and that is another alternate proposal that does include some issues related to the border. This is put together by a bipartisan group led by Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania. They are trying to get a discharge petition moved in the House that would effectively force the hand of the House Speaker to get something onto the floor. But still, as always, a lot of questions about whether that can actually get to a vote.
Mitchell Miller is Capitol Hill correspondent for WTOP. As always, thanks so much.
You bet.
And we'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Hear the Federal Drive on your schedule. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.